you study like other cultures, Eskimos had like 1,000 words for snow, and we have one word. You know, Russians have like 40 words for the color blue, and we have one word, kind of thing. As the language gets smaller and smaller and more uniform, our thoughts become more and more limited and uniform. So to hear a word like inner sky, it opens up all these other ideas in your mind.
Mm.
Whereas we don't have a word like that in English, because I'm doing things for snow, and we have one word. You know, Russians have like 40 words for the color blue, and we have one word, kind of thing. As the language gets smaller and smaller and more uniform, our we're for snow, and we have one word. You know, Russians have like 40 words for the color blue, and we have one word. As the language gets smaller and smaller and more uniform, we're And something about me was not comfortable with that. It seemed cheap, it seemed easy, and it seemed lazy. And I know myself that if I'm not challenged by something different, I grow bored. So I have to write something that feels like there's energy behind it. There's anger, there's love, there's something powerful behind it. I have to feel it or it won't be in the words. So if I'm just doing the 48 Laws of Power Part 2, it won't be there. It'll have an emptiness. And damn it, a lot of artists and writers fall into that trap, and it's why their books kind of have this sort of hollow ring to them, right? They're just going through the motions, just repeating what worked before. And I can't stand that feeling. I have to feel like I'm off into a new land with this new book. So each book has to represent a challenge, right? And so the one I'm writing now is completely different from all 7 of the other books. And it's an incredible challenge, but it makes me excited about it every day because I know I cannot repeat the same kind of books over and over and over again. My soul will be dead, and I have to feel alive in this project. What are you talking about? I'm not answering
You
your
are. You're
question.
totally answering my
Okay.
question. I'm loving these personal answers. No, I can resonate very deeply. But I always try to find working through it. It feels alive. It needs to feel alive. I can't write theory or
Yeah,
like the book has to be the same. And I've
exactly.
only just started the journey into it. But as I'm hearing what I'm having to, that I feel that I'm thinking about it in a healthy way.
Yeah.
Because yeah, I was about to write my third book, and the topic that I wanted is so you're spending more time, like we said earlier, you're spending more time with emptiness
Yeah.
because there's a sense of, well, I don't know which direction this book's
Yeah.
going to go in.
Yeah.
So it's that comfortable with discomfort and uncertainty.
Yeah.
But there's a joy in that.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. When you're discovering your process through a book or work, how have you learned to become comfortable in the discomfort of creativity? In that, like, you don't know where the path's going to take you. You don't know if it's going to land or not. You don't know if it. Like, how are you grappling with that process of what we're discussing?
Well, it's very strange because I'm dealing with it right this very moment. I'm writing something that's driving me crazy, and it's this, and the very subject I'm writing about is about what I'm going through. So I'm writing it. This is in my book on the sublime, and I'm writing about the concept of the daemon. Are you familiar with that? It's the idea. It's an ancient Greek idea, but it's in many other cultures, that we have a second self. That there's something, there's a voice inside of us that is guiding us to something higher or better, but it can also lead us to something lower and worse. It can be demonic, which is where the word comes from, or it can be something. And Socrates had his daemon. There was a voice inside of him, and it said, it always just said, this is the right way to go, or this is the wrong way to go. Nothing more than that, right? And so when I'm writing, it doesn't feel right. It's driving me crazy. I'm going through it right now. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't resonate. It's not true. It's not real. You got to start over. You got to do it again. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, God, I've lost it. I'm getting old and I just don't have my mojo anymore. But then I realized I've gone through this like 85 times every single book. It'll come to you, it'll come back. It isn't right because it doesn't feel right. It doesn't resonate. It doesn't have a reality to it. So I have to go through this process where I write something and it excites me and it interests me and it just flows out of me, as opposed to like I have to pull every word out. And so I learned to trust myself that eventually I'll figure it out. But each time I hit that wall, I go, this is it, Robert, you're finished. The book isn't going to come out, you're done. The wells are dry, you know.
Yeah,
so.
that's so interesting. I feel like that is every creative's journey. Like, it has to go through that, the wells are dry, as you just said, that kind of experience of, that's it, it's over, there's nothing else coming out now, you know, and it's almost like, as we know, like the cliche of like, it's on the other side of that feeling.
Yeah.
But it's true. There is a sense of when everything is just not making sense. How have you learned to sense whether something feels true to you? Because it obviously felt true to someone. How do you decide between this feels true, it feels real to me, if people don't agree with it?
It just feels that way.
It's purely just a feeling.
First of all, it like, I'm always trying to get at what's real and not at what's theoretical. I really dislike abstraction of its own sake, right? It feels like it's a way of eluding something. It's an evasion. I want to get at the core of the reality of what I'm trying to write about. And so when I get it, I feel it, and I know that I've done that. And I have the reader in my mind, and I know the reader can connect to it. It's going to have a personal appeal. Whereas I have a tendency to be abstract and professorial and theoretical. I cross all of that out. You saw my notebooks, 95% of it's crossed out, and I don't let the public ever see that side of me because I don't like it. I want my books to feel like I'm doing something that's actually truthful and real that people don't like to talk about. So right now, I'm writing about what is our self, what is the sense of self that we have. It's a very limited idea about the self. We have a very limited idea about consciousness. We have a very limited idea of what it means to be a human being in the 21st century. We're actually much more immense and much more interesting than we think we are. We have these possibilities, these connections, because we're a part of something incredibly vast. And to have consciousness is absolutely an astounding thing, right? So I want to sort of expand what you, the reader, thinks of who you are, what your self is. It's much larger than you imagine. But I have to convey that in language that feels right to me, that feels authentic, that feels like everybody in Africa, in China, in India, in Idaho is going to be able to relate to it, you know?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that's what I was alluding to with that invisible world thing, of like how that's what we don't see. Like there's so much to ourselves that we don't see, that we're fully unaware of, that we don't realize we have access to.
Right.
And yeah, finding the right terminology, I find to be such a, there's one word that I love, which is a bit more ethereal, but I guess an astronomer could find some beauty in it. But there's a term in the Vedic literatures called Antarakash, which means inner sky.
Say it again.
Antarakash. Antar means
Antarakash.
inner, and Akash means sky.
Inner sky?
Yeah, inner sky. And it's this idea of how, you know, we're so fascinated by outer space, but there's that same inner sky that exists. So just that, like the galaxy and the planetary systems and everything else, that exists internally too.
Oh, I have to.
But there has to be just as we have to go and do space exploration,
Yeah.
you could do the same internally.
Oh, for sure.
And you discover so much.
That's exactly what I'm writing about.
Yeah,
That's very interesting.
Yeah. And it's fascinating. So yeah, I find language as well. I find vocabulary so needed, and I feel like I grew up with a smart vocabulary, but not the biggest. I feel reading, of course, expands that, and especially when we read history and books. And I found that language is just so powerful, and I worry that social media exposes us to such limited language that the brain and the mind and the consciousness doesn't have the opportunity to be expansive because the words don't allow for it. If we're all reading the same memes and the same trends and the same hashtags, and it kind of just creates this very, very limited space of consciousness.
Well, that's why I like looking at other languages. I speak several other languages, and I'm constantly learning them. And right now I'm reading a lot about an African culture called the Akan in West Africa, in Ghana. And their concepts of the soul, the spirit, and the body. And they have a word in there called Sun Sum. And we translate it to spirit. But then I'm reading the African philosophers who actually know that word, and they go, it's not the same as the word spirit. And then they go on and describe it. And that one word contains all of these other worlds that are so weird and interesting that the word spirit in English does not convey, right? You know, and other languages have that sense. And so language can have that possibility where it opens up. It's not just this one track meaning. It has other balances, other possibilities to it, right? And so, yeah, we're kind of deadening our language in a way. And you know, if you study like other cultures, you know, Eskimos had like 1,000 words for snow, and we have one word. You know, Russians have like 40 words for the color blue, and we have one word, kind of thing. As the language gets smaller and smaller and more uniform, our thoughts become more and more limited and uniform. So to hear a word like inner sky, it opens up all these other ideas in your mind. Whereas we don't have a word like that in English, you know? And then because I'm doing things with Zen, Japanese language is so rich with things that we can't possibly even begin to express in English, you know? So, yeah.
What have been other ways of people opening up their minds? This has been one of my favorite things to do. I remember reading a quote from Robin Sharma years ago that said, ordinary people have big TVs, extraordinary people have big libraries. And it was one of those, you know, little dreams I had. That was like, one day I'm at home, I'm going to have a big library. And that was one of my most favorite things to kind of put together when I moved home. And I started spending more time when I would travel. I've always collected books. And I started also expanding my audio library. I realized as I grew, when I was growing up, we listened to a very limited form of music in my home. And even as I was growing up as a teenager, I listened to like one genre of music.
What was that?
Rap and hip hop. Like that was, and again, I love rap and hip hop. I love rap and hip hop history. It's super cool. No issues with it. I just think that my audio library was so limited in my teens Now that I'm in my 30s, I'm trying to listen to so many random different things, which again inspire different thoughts, different feelings, different emotions. And so I realized that vocabulary was becoming, audio is becoming nothing. What are other things that you've discovered that help open up that consciousness in mind? Because as we both keep referring to, social media technology is almost making us more limited, more singular, more one-dimensional.
Well, as I said, it's something I'm writing about right now. So music and the audible stuff is very, very interesting, very exciting. So this is new phenomenon where musicologists have been able to recreate music from eras that we never could listen to before. So I was writing at one point about a festival in ancient Greece, and to put me in the mood, I wanted to hear ancient Greek music. Well, that doesn't exist. I don't know recordings of it, but sure enough, there are. And the rhythms and the sound is so weird and alien that it makes it. Music captures the spirit of a time, right? So if we're only hearing these same melodies, you hear cars going by with that same kind of pop song, it's such a limited circle of harmony, such a limited circle of what music can be. But when you open up to African music, to music from ancient Babylonia, to Greece, to music in South America, other rhythms, other poetry in music and sounds, it's mind-blowing, it's interesting. So that's what I'm saying, the human animal is much more interesting than we think it is. Reading about ancient cultures is a very mind-expansive project you can go on.
Any books you recommend in that?
You know what's so exciting now is they have these books called The Daily Life in. Daily Life in Ancient Babylonia, The Daily Life in, I forget which city in India, Daily Life in Ancient Greece, etc. And you get a feel for not just grand philosophical issues, but how people ate, what their houses were like. So I was writing I just wrote a chapter about our relationship to time and history. And I was trying to teach the reader in my new book, I'm giving them exercises. And I'm saying, try to imagine yourself in a world 1,000 years ago. You walk out your front door. There's no mechanical sounds. There's no airplanes. There's no cars. There's no machines. It's just birds, maybe a saw and a hammer is the most you're going to hear. That's a strange thing. There are no signs. There are no advertisements. There's no words everywhere. It's kind of empty, right? You're just wandering around. There are all these kind of rancid, weird, horrible smells because people aren't bathing. There's no, but they're very human smells, right? Your whole sensory experience is on another level. But when you live in this 21st century world where things are so sanitized, where we don't smell these things, we only hear these packaged mechanical sounds, your sensory world is shrinking down and down and down. And you realize, yeah, ancient world, they had some bad stuff. They weren't very good. You know, they had slavery. I understand all of the negatives, so I'm not painting this portrait. But on another level, their realm of senses, their realm of language, their internal world were far richer than ours. And by connecting to that, by reading these books, not just the daily life thing I said, but actually texts from those times, as I was mentioning when I read a monk, a Zen monk in the 11th century, and the different thought processes, it opened my mind to a different way of thinking, a different way of accessing reality. Like I'm reading a lot about the Aztecs, because I'm so obsessed with the Aztecs, I don't know why. And they had these amazing spectacles. That was the thing about the ancient world, these festivals and spectacles that are far beyond Burning Man or any rock concert, right? You know, I could describe the fire ceremony in Aztec culture that only occurred every 70 years. There is nothing you can ever imagine in your life that would be like that. It is so utterly spectacular. And so I had this 800-page book called Aztec Philosophy. And it's very theoretical, but God, it gives you an entree into a totally different way of thinking about the world, right? Where they have these metaphors. that the universe has this energy. Some of the energy is like string that's being wound around in a certain way. It's like weaving, like other things like that. This kind of energy of the world has. Wow, this is fascinating. You know, our ancestors were actually thinking, but they're not our ancestors, they're us. It's a human being. We're all human. We all have the same kind of consciousness.
Yeah. Yeah, I love also finding things in match, but they're in different languages. And so,
What?
so I went to Hawaii a few years ago, which obviously for someone who grew up in London, it's not London. People in America or LA travel to Hawaii fairly often. I went to Hawaii and, well, not often, it's more accessible, but I went recently and my wife and I went on one of the tours there, and they showed us the petroglyphs which are there, obviously, as a storytelling technique. And they were showing us how when the child is born, they used to place their notebook on the ground, and they would then draw a spiral around it. And that was seen as the place that started its energy and reconnect with the earth.
How exciting.
I was thinking, that's spectacular. I wish everyone felt this connection to the earth. And then we would go out every morning and pay respect to the sun, and we would take part in the ceremony with them. And in India, there's something called Surya Namaskar, which it translates to sun salutation.
Sure.
Which, again, I've talked to Andrew Huberman about this. It's like kicking off the circadian rhythm, but the goal is you pay your respects to the sun for everything it offers to you and the energy that it provides. And so to see that in Hawaiian culture, Indian culture, and then I was in Bhutan recently. I went on a trip to Bhutan, which I'd always wanted to visit. And this is a culture that really feels like you're going.
And you can feel that. And you can feel like this is what it was like 2,000, 100,000 years ago. But we don't have that feeling with human things, because every city has its Starbucks, its malls, its generic culture that we've transported throughout the world. So to have a place where you can actually go back in time is fantastic. But I wish it wasn't so far away. You know?
Yeah, it's fun. It's worth visiting for anyone who wants to. It was a really special trip. But you're right. The generic culture is the right word. Actually, there's every street looks the same. Every area looks the same. I know there's a lot of passion behind local businesses, and it's healthy. People want to support local business. We need more of that, because the generic culture really takes away from, like, you expect. I mean, I was in India just recently on the way back.
It's Howard Gardner's 5 Frames of Mind. It's helped me immensely. When I got out of the car and I got pulled in, I thought like 10 seconds had passed. My wife told me, no, that was like 10 minutes. I had no sense of time. Everything was scrambled. And so it was very, very elegant. Taught me so much, things that I can barely even express now. I'm always now thinking of strange things that come to me because my brain was damaged. It made me realize that the brain creates everything. So I can't communicate with my hand, my fingers. I can't communicate, my brain can't communicate with my leg, right? So you think that walking and riding and handling things is just your body operating a certain way? It's your brain telling you how to move these different things. When that brain stops functioning, you realize how much your brain determines everything. It all starts there. And when there's damage to your brain, your whole thinking alters, etc. Not to mention how you look at life itself after something like that. So it was a terrible experience. It's ruined so many things that I loved in life, but it's given me an awful lot as well in return that I could go on for hours and talk about, because it was the most powerful experience of my life.
When you were going through your re-emergence into consciousness in the hospital, did you feel as if you were observing these multiple versions of yourself? Maybe a different way to phrase it is, did you feel you were in the circuit board that is your brain, observing how you normally function, and you could see multiple versions of yourself, or was it something else where you
thing that happened was, sometimes you can't remember. Your memory might be playing tricks on you. So I also have to realize that maybe I'm not remembering exactly what happened. But I've since translated it in a different way, so that's a caveat. I'm aware of it. But I had this vision that I was dead when I first became conscious, and that I was up in the sky and I was looking down, and my mother and my wife were talking, just like over my grave, I suppose. And I had this feeling, everything's okay. I'm gone, but life goes on. They're doing fine. It's okay, right? So I don't know about that sense itself, whether it was like aware of it happening, but I have a feeling it was something from the outside. I don't really know the answer to that because it's very confusing. The other feeling I had was life, when I was having the stroke, was life draining out of me and my bones getting softer and softer and softer. And I can't really logically explain that, the feeling of bones softening up and dissolving. But for weeks and months afterwards, I could access that feeling of my bones dissolving, etc. It was a feeling of all your energy draining out of you, you die, literally. So, reading books about near-death experiences, because that's a lot of what I'm doing. It's a big part of my next book. God, it's been fascinating. There's so many interesting things to it. Teaches us so much.
So A, you survived your stroke. B, your mental faculties, I'm grateful. I probably not, but still very grateful. So there, just illustrates how grateful you must be. B, that you've maintained, if not grown, your mental faculties. I mean, you seem extremely sharp. I promise you, you're not missing a beat. One always wonders, right? Actually, one of the most common fears people have is that somehow they're losing their mind or their memory, and people aren't, and they aren't aware of it. You hear, I have family members who have asked that if they ever start to exhibit signs of severe dementia, that I, put an end to them, which I won't. That's not my place in this world. But I think it's a common fear among people. But you're still extremely sharp, and thank goodness for it. And you mentioned that while you've lost certain abilities, that new appreciation and new abilities have surfaced. Perhaps share what some of those are and what they mean to you. Because I think that when one hears about somebody having a stroke, we tend to focus on what's lacking, but clearly this has been a transformative experience, also in positive ways.
Well, I had to confront some of my own demons. I had to confront the sense that I expected things out of life, and here they're taken away, and I'm kind of ungrateful for being alive, and here I'm pissed off that it takes me 10 minutes to tie my shoes and I can't really button my shirt. I had to learn what really matters and to have patience and stuff. The other thing was, I used to love hiking. I was very physically active, and I'm sitting at my window in my office and see people running up and down, bicycling, walking their dogs. God, I'm so envious. If I could walk a dog right now, I'd be the happiest person alive. But then I go through a thought process which maybe isn't completely healthy, which is they're not aware of how wonderful it is just to walk a dog. But I'm aware of it. So when I go out in my backyard and I can't walk, and I'm seeing, like, I know this is gonna sound really triacly and sentimental, but I see, butterflies or things in my garden, I'm like, whoa, that's incredible, Things like that I couldn't appreciate before because I'm sedentary and I can't move. I have to suddenly pay attention to what's around me, not take it for granted, and find and suck all the pleasure out of it that I can. So now, when I sit at my desk to write a book, it's 4 hours until I can stand. Those 4 hours are like such bliss for me. I truly appreciate it now because I know that my brain is almost gone, right? So it means so much for me. And to just be alive, is just a wondrous experience. I have a chapter in my new book called Awaken to the Strangeness of Being Alive. And it's about the fact that if you think about it and how unlikely it is that we humans evolved at all, even that we even exist. All the bottlenecks in evolution that we had to pass through, including the disappearance of the dinosaurs and the emergence of mammals. But there are 20 other huge bottlenecks throughout the history of evolution. We had to pass through all of those. We nearly went extinct 80,000 years ago from some virus that infected. There were only 8,000 people, humans on the planet. All these different things. And here we are with Zoom meetings, et cetera, et cetera. It's like the strangest story you can ever, it's beyond science fiction, but nobody thinks about it. Nobody sits down and goes, God, I'm alive. If you went back and did the chain of people that had to connect and have children leading up to your parents, the unlikeliness of you ever being born is astronomical. I mean, unless my science is all wrong. 70,000 generations of people meeting, et cetera, finally ending at your DNA. I mean, unless I'm missing something, it's pretty unlikely. But nobody thinks about it. Well, I certainly think about it now because I almost died. I had nothing else to think about. So I have to entertain my brain the way Milton Erickson had to entertain himself by observing people. So it's taken a lot away from me. I can't swim. I'm riding my recumbent bike, which I love, and 80-year-old grandmothers are zipping by me. And God, how awful. I'm so envious. My insecurities all well up. And I realize, hey, I'm like on a boat. I'm sailing. It's wonderful. I'm outside. I have to go through these processes. But I think it's developed me in some way. In the end, very true.
I also think you have to adjust the new frame rate. Like the old movie had a certain frame rate. This movie has a certain frame rate. But that within that frame rate, there are gifts to be had. Certain minutes prior. I think a critical message is also to inspire a sense of urgency in people.
Yeah.
I think people hear a sense of urgency and they go, oh God, I'm already under so much pressure, life's so hard. But we're not talking about a sense of urgency to take on more of what life has to offer. I think we're talking about a sense of urgency to find one's purpose, which takes work and is an ongoing process, but to really get out of modes of apathy, laziness, languishing, and to start, as you've described it, paying deeper attention. I mean, this is a concept that was super important for me to hear about, and I learned about it from you, was how do you get yourself out of a rut? You start paying deeper attention to the things around you and inside you. Yeah. And perhaps not coincidentally, you refer to that as the death.
So, it's a strategy for my book. I wrote a book on strategy, my version of the art of war. Strategies of war, but it's really about strategy, strategic thinking. It's inspired from Sun Tzu, the great Chinese strategist, but it has vast the idea of you can almost think of it like barometric pressure. When necessity is pressing in on you, like your back is against the wall, like you have to get something done, and there's like this pressure around you, you find energy in it that you never believed before. William James talks about this when he talks about getting a second wind, which explains it very eloquently. When you feel like your life's in danger, suddenly you can leap over things that you never could leap over before. So Sun Tzu says, put an army on death ground and it will fight until it wins. Meaning, put an army with its back to the ocean or a back to the mountain, and it's either win or die. They're going to fight 10 times harder. You're going to find the energy in you that you normally lack. When death is facing you in the face, or urgency or deadlines, or people pressing in on you. When that barometric pressure loosens up and there's none of it, you think you have all the time in the world, you get nothing done. Wow, man, I'm 23. I've got all these years ahead of me. I'm gonna figure it out, right? I'm not gonna die. I got 50, 70, 80 years ahead of me. No, you don't. That pressure now is gone, and you're wasting time. You're doing all sorts of things that aren't leading to any kind of skill. You're not learning or anything. You need to put yourself on death ground. You need to feel that barometric pressure, which is the actual reality. The actual reality is you could die tomorrow. You could have a stroke tomorrow. You could be fired tomorrow. Everything could fall apart. You need to have that sense of urgency now, because that's the reality. You're fooling yourself by thinking you have all of this time. And so when you feel that pressure, suddenly you can move mountains. You have energy. Your life, you just have focus, etc. Neurologically, everything clicks in, and people who've had that experience where they've felt like the ship was going under and they better get their act together and survive, they talk about all these physical processes. I have a story in my new book. I hope I'm not boring you, folks.
No, please, quite the opposite.
About a mountain climber who he was climbing this mountain by himself, and he was having a great time, but there was a storm coming and he had to get down. And he suddenly fell, and he cut his leg open massively, and there was like a branch sticking in it. And he broke all these bones, and he was gonna die. He was on a ledge. You could see that it was getting dark, and storm clouds were massing. This was in the Rocky Mountains. He was alone, and suddenly he managed to get up on his 2 feet. And he can't explain how, but all of this energy, all this adrenaline started flowing in him. And he said he was like a mountain goat. He was like going down the ledge. He jumped. He was able to kind of get down to another ledge. He got out of it. And for the next 20 years, he was haunted by, how did that happen? I want that feeling again, because it was actually the most ecstatic feeling. I had energy that I never suspected in myself. And so he tries everything to get that feeling back. He tries climbing other mountains. He tries going to Mount Everest. And it doesn't come back. And finally, he kind of figures out the formula for it and why it happened. He studies a lot of neuroscience. It's a great book. I'm using it in my new book. It's called Bone Games. Very interesting book. A lot of science in it. And he got the feeling back in a smaller sense, but it was the feeling of your life is in danger. I better get my act together or it's the end. And suddenly adrenaline, dopamine, all the other things were occurring in him, and he found that energy. So that's the ultimate kind of death ground right there.
The human will to live is truly incredible. And so now I have to say, as I said before, I'm so grateful that your stroke didn't take you out because clearly there's still so much in there, and you're continuing to share.
These lands are my home. How do
what
I
is
know you won't bring
really
trouble to them?
Exquisitely useful knowledge. It's just kind of astonishing to me. I started off today's discussion expressing my gratitude for what you've already done for my life and for the lives of so many other people through your books. It's clear you've been on a foraging exploration, and that foraging for organizing and communicating information, mainly in the form of written books, but also online content. You have a terrific YouTube channel, which I subscribe to and follow and listen to with rapt attention. And the other venues with which you share information, including this one today, are truly valuable and appreciated. So I want to say on behalf of myself and those that know me and your work for years, also sure to know who you are, what you're about. And it's just so clear that this one comes from you, and that whatever early seed planted this, that we're grateful for better seed. So I could make this list very, very long with the number of specific ways in which you've improved the journey through life and made it clearer. I mean, life is certainly can be hard, but it also can be really confusing. And I feel that the Robert Greene roadmap, even though it's but one roadmap, is an extremely valuable map to have and to use. Certainly has been for me. So just an enormous thank you, Robert. Thanks for sharing today and for all you do and all that you're still doing in the future.
Thank you. I wish I could find the word for explaining the kind of weird emotions I was feeling when I hear them. It was maybe British, maybe it's accent or something. But yeah.
We'll have to have you back here again when the book comes in. I can't wait, but we will.
Yeah, hopefully.
I'm confident you will. You can come back again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining me for today's discussion with Robert Greene. If you found the conversation to be as stimulating as I did. If you're learning from and or enjoying this podcast, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's a terrific zero-cost way to support us. In addition, please subscribe to the podcast on both Spotify and Apple.
Faster rate. Okay. And so the thing is, how do you find that when you're older? When you're 21, I give people a lot of help, and it's usually not so difficult. We can go through that process. It gets harder when you're 30 and you've been wandering around, but it's not impossible. I didn't really find my exact path until I was 38, 39, to be honest. So there's hope. When you get 40 and you get 50, it gets more and more difficult, right? And it's very sad if you wasted that seed of uniqueness that I'm talking about. And I tell people there are ways of going back, and we go through a process like archaeology. We have to dig and dig and dig and find those bones from your childhood that indicated what you were meant to do. But when you find your life's task, everything opens up. It doesn't mean you figured out, okay, I've got to aim for this particular job when I'm 28. That's not how it works. It gives you a sense of direction. You can try different things. You can experiment. You can have fun when you're in your 20s. You're going to learn. You can learn skills. But it gives you an overall framework instead of, whoa, all of this confusion, this chaos, social media, the internet, I could go here, here, here. You're lost at sea. It gives you a very important sense of direction, a compass.
As you described this, I have this image of, you mentioned animals that presumably don't have a lot of flexibility in terms of the niches they can exist in. But the way I imagine this process is that as a human, we're plopped into an environment, and here I'm using analogy, where we don't really know if we are an aquatic animal, a terrestrial animal, or an avian, right?
Or an amphibian.
Or an amphibian, for that matter. And to make the wrong choice, right? To be an amphibian who's trying to fly, although I'm sure they're out there in the animal kingdom, it's not just a waste of time, it's probably deadly.
Yeah.
And not to over-dramatize the failure of finding one's purpose, but I see it that way. Whereas perhaps we could just say that the process of finding one's purpose is to realize, like, I'm an amphibian. I can go in and out of water, whereas a bunch of other creatures around me stop at the water's edge.
Right.
And this is really cool. And a bunch of these other things, like these flying things, that they can't actually even go in the water.
Right.
Some of them might be on the surface or dive into it, but they can't do what I can do. So the process of self-discovery, it sounds like, is about restricting one's choices to a sort of wedge within the full landscape of options. And for me, I can certainly recall, after reading Mastery, it helped me recall some early seed emotions that I experienced as a very distinct sensation in my body.
Can you describe it?
Yeah.
How can I help?
Well, without making it too specific to my unique tastes, as a kid, I loved flora and fauna. I loved learning about biology.
Sure.
No surprise there. But animals and how they move in particular, and fish, and going to a proper aquarium store for the first time for me, and going snorkeling for the first time was like, wow. And even as I describe it, it's almost like my body floats. I feel it in my left arm, of all things, and it feels like there's something to do about it. It's not just that I'm in observation of things that delight me.
Right.
It's like there's an activation state created within me, like I got to do something with this. And typically it's tell everybody about it until they won't listen anymore. But oftentimes it's to also draw those things, to think about them, and I just delight in them. It's a constant source of delight. And so seeds such as those, and there are a few other things in that landscape of flora and fauna, and learning about animals and biology, including the human animal, and then organizing information feels so satisfying to me. It's like a drug that, and so it just feels like this, eternal spring of life, right? And so for me, that's what it was. And in 2015, when I was teaching that course, the course I loved, but I was feeling a little bit astray in my scientific career. And then I read Mastery, and I realized, yes, I love running a laboratory, I love teaching, but there's something else for me, and it has to do not with a podcast. I didn't even know what a podcast. I knew what a podcast was. I was listening to podcasts at that time, but when I was on social media, I had no thoughts of having a podcast. But what I wanted was that feeling in its total number of forms.
Right.
That's the goal. Get that feeling in as many forms as possible.
Right.
Is that about?
That's absolutely perfect, because the connection to what I'm talking about, it's not an intellectual thing. It's visceral. It's emotional. It's physical, right? And you feel it in your body. And when you're doing it, it's like it's at your level. It's like you're swimming with the current. You feel it. Things are easy. Everything clicks together. There's a delight. Not everything is going to be delightful. There's going to be tedium involved. There's going to be moments of boredom. But you're able to withstand the moments of boredom because you feel that deep overall connection. So yes, that's precisely what I'm talking about. I mean, for me, it's a little bit a similar thing is, I said about words, but the other thing that I was obsessed with when I was a kid was early human ancestors. Don't ask me why. I just was so obsessed with our ancestors millions of years ago, and how it's possible to be living here in the 60s or 70s with cars and everything, but to come to where we are now. And I wrote a short story when I was 8 years old about a vulture. It was written from the point of view of a vulture watching the first humans kind of emerge on the planet. I'm sure it was absolutely awful, dreadful. But the weird thing is, I'm writing a new book, and all I'm doing in that book is going into early humans. And I feel like a kid again. I'm so excited. I'm so happy. So I can very much relate to your story.
You mentioned these 5 different forms of intelligence, or frames of mind, as you refer to them. And I'm certainly aware that I lean towards a more intellectual interest, although, as you pointed out, the excitement, the delight is visceral.
Yeah.
And the actions are actions. They're of the body, ultimately.
Right.
One has to draw, speak, write books, etc., to transmute that excitement into something real. For people that are not as intellectually tuned, but maybe are kinesthetically tuned, for instance, I can only wonder what that's like. Not completely uncoordinated, but I don't think I have a kinesthetic attunement or frame of mind. But I've, for instance, had a podcast listener mention that they think in feels, that they literally experience thought as as sort of a patchwork of bodily sensations.
Right.
And that thought for them is not the stuff from the neck up, but only from the neck down, which to me was really intriguing. And so I only raise this because there have to be as you point out, there's an infinite number of different sort of orientations based on our unique DNA and experience. But what do you think explains why these particular seeds, or as you point out, like the direction that the grain runs in the brain? I mean, it's partially going to be nature, it's going to be DNA.
For sure.
But we're talking about this as if there's some exciting or awe-inspiring or delightful thing that captures us. Can it be the other way too? Can it be, one has a bad experience as a child in an intellectual environment, and then decides, I'm going in things of the body feel good, things of the mind, of intellect feels bad. And does it matter whether or not we are drawn to our purpose by recognizing what we love or what we hate, or are both useful?
Oh, they're both very, very useful. A lot of intelligence is nonverbal. We think in terms of images. We're very much infected by the emotions of other people. So I know, for instance, my mother is very, very interested in history. She's obsessed with history, and I probably absorbed her interest in history. I don't think there's a gene for that interest, So you're going to absorb things from your parents as well. So it's not all just genetic. But yeah, what you hate will will have a big thing. But the problem with doing that is, if you go into a direction and you're in elementary school, etc., and they force you to learn math and you hate it, what it tends to do is it turns you off from learning in general. Think, I don't want to be disciplined. I don't want to go through anything because it's painful. It doesn't lead anywhere. It's not me. It's frustration. It turns you off from learning in general. So it's really, really important for a child to have the love experience as early as possible so that they can know what they hate and why they hate it, right? And then they can rebel and they can go into that field, as opposed to, I hate learning, I hate discipline, I hate studying, I hate trying things over and over again. If you're kinesthetically oriented, and a part of me, I understand that because I love sports, is you have to practice. It's going to take a lot of, you're not going to instantly be good at something, right? And that's going to require a love of it, right? But if your math experience, I hate learning shit, it's going to transfer to sports. You're going to hate discipline in general. So it's very important for parents to let that child have at least glimmers of that love moment. I know for me, when I finished college and entered the work world, I had to get a job. I worked in journalism. I hated it. I hated working for other people. I hated office politics. I hated all the egos. I hated the smarminess. I hated the lack of quality. It's all about, making money and getting things out there. When I worked in Hollywood, I hated it. I hated working in Hollywood. That formed me very much. Made me go in the direction I went in, but only from the basis of I knew that I was going to be a writer. So, that's very important that it's not just to conform you. There also has to be that positive, deep, love of something that also is connected with someone.
You just said really well, energy, motivation comes from either pressure, desire for something or desire to get away from something. And earlier when we were talking about how we are so much more engaged and driven by things that stir us emotionally, and actually, based on the neuroscience, two of them for sure, that only by the release of certain neurochemicals in the brain does our brain have any reason to change, right? If you don't feel agitation, you can do everything that you're trying to do, of course your brain wouldn't change. Like, why would it, right? That agitation is a signature of the neurochemicals that are saying, hey, something's different now.
Right.
You might need to do something different, including rewire yourself, right? And that can come from positive or negative experiences.
Of course.
Now, I'm obsessed with this idea of energy. I mean, we all want to have more energy and focus, and normally we hear about the concept of energy in the context of caloric energy, like what should we eat and when and how much, and we need to get sleep. But what you're really referring to is neural energy, like the engagement of ourselves that's, sitting there ready to be engaged, but it requires the right experiential macronutrients, right? The experiential macronutrients, as opposed to nutrition. That's not sufficient. It's necessary, but not sufficient. So, would you say that we are, let's say, since a good number of our listeners are adults, but from our 20s on, that the things that excite us as adults, that really generates readiness or grab our attention, are still informative or guiding our decisions to have the best life and life purpose?
Well, what do you technically mean by that? I mean, because there are things that excite you in a kind of a quick way, where you have to relieve some tension, and there's entertainment, and there's things that kind of give you pretty immediate gratification. And there's the larger picture of something that will give you fulfillment. So you can feel that when you're older and you can pay attention to it. But a lot of the time we're paying too much attention to the immediate pleasures of life, to what gives us instant gratification, and that's what we're grabbing for. So this is a much more kind of deeper process that involves that digging that I was saying. It's deeper than just kind of, I like this, I don't like that, kind of thing. It's more something macro than just that. And so when you're in your 20s or in your 30s or your 40s, you want to be paying attention to yourself. And the problem with people in the world today is you're not paying attention to yourself. You're not inside your own head. You don't hear those voices. You don't hear what you love, what you like anymore, because as I said, there's so many of these other distractions going on. And so you're always like attuned to what other people like, right? Because you're in social media. This is what people are following. This is what they're interested in. As opposed to disengaging, backing off from that and looking at yourself and going through the process of, that's not me. Actually, I don't really like that, you know? And so what you're talking about is, I think, very profound, is levels of frustration or anxiety are definite signals that you must pay attention to, that they're telling you this isn't a good direction for you. This is a waste of time for you. And in general, I tell people self-awareness, being able to hear those voices, to understand that your frustration is telling you something. And sometimes you just act on it without understanding it. But understanding why you're frustrated, why you don't like your career, why you're not happy about where you're going is the key to everything. It will open up, it will actually be able, even in your 30s, to return you to that childhood inclination. But if you can't listen to where those emotions come from, then they're useless. They're not teaching you anything.
As we all know, quality nutrition influences, of course, our physical health, but also our mental health and our cognitive functioning, our memory, our ability to learn new things and to focus. And we know that one of the most important features of high-quality nutrition is making sure that we get enough vitamins and minerals from high-quality, unprocessed or minimally processed sources, as well as enough probiotics and prebiotics and fiber to support basically all the cellular functions in all of the new relational dynamics that become apparent and our potential involvement in them. It's not talked about enough how dramatically puberty changes the brain.
Sure.
I mean, we are different people before and after puberty.
Hormones that are suddenly raging.
The hormones are there, and it's not just changes in how we view the world, but changes in how the world views us.
Yeah.
And not just through the lens of sexuality, but also expectation of what we are capable of, what we are responsible for or not responsible for, our learning capacity. I mean, puberty is like this, it's also the most rapid stage of aging in our entire lifespan.
Right.
Those kids that go home for summer and then come back shaving, I was sort of I wasn't a late bloomer, but I had a long protracted puberty, but I remember those kids. I'm sure we all remember those kids. Everything changes. And so I think prior to puberty, these seeds, as you've described them, of delight or of resistance to things, I think they are unadulterated. They're not contaminated
Right.
by the voices and expectations of others. And so I can see the challenge of reaching back to those as an adult. I wonder if this relates to something that I've heard you talk about before, although perhaps not as much as some of the other topics you've discussed publicly, which is the real versus the false sublime.
Oh.
Could you perhaps just define for us what sublime really is, what a sublime experience is, and the distinction between real and false sublime experiences? Because I feel like this relates to
really?
finding that seed. Right, it's about finding authentic seeds within us, as opposed to when emotions can be distracting and misleading.
Wow. I never made that connection. And it's the book that I'm writing right now, so thank you for that. I'll have to think about that. I'm writing a book on the sublime. And I have several ways of kind of illustrating. I generally like to use a metaphor. And the metaphor is that being a human being, being a social human being living in a particular culture, means that you live inside of a circle. And that circle of that time are the conventions of thinking, of ideas that are acceptable, of behavior that is acceptable. This is where you can go mentally, where you can go physically, all the codes and conventions. So that circle for ancient Egypt and for 21st century America, they're obviously very different, but it's the same circle. It's the same limiting factor. You're not supposed to go outside of it. These are thoughts, experiences, behavior you're not supposed to do. The sublime is what lies just outside that circle. The word sublime comes from on the threshold of. It's like, here's a door, and the sublime is literally at the threshold of the door. You're looking out into something else, right? And the quintessential sublime experience is a near-death experience. You're standing on the doorway, the threshold of death itself, right? And so In my book, I'm illustrating the different kinds of sublime experiences that you can have in relation to the cosmos, in the relation to thinking about being alive. Just being alive is the strangest sensation you could possibly have. I know that very personally after my stroke. I go into a chapter on childhood and how sublime your own childhood was. I go into animals, the relation to animals. I have a chapter about the brain, a chapter about love. I'm working right now on a chapter about history, okay? But what I'm trying to say is the human brain is wired for these experiences, is wired for transcendental experiences that take us out of the narrow little realm that we live in. Because we're aware of our death as the only animal truly conscious of its own mortality, and it frightens the hell out of us. And the idea that we can see something larger than just the banal parts of our life is a doorway that allows us to kind of transcend the moment, to feel connected to something larger, to feel connected to some power in the cosmos, to evolution itself, right? And so we're wired for that. And I'm writing a chapter now about 40,000 years ago, at the moment where I think the sublime was born. There's a story that I'm trying to illustrate right now with our upper Paleolithic ancestors. So it's deep inside of us. We need it. We have to have it. In the 21st century, we have very few avenues for it, any real avenues. Religion used to be the main kind of way of accessing this. And so, because it's so deep, we reach for false forms of the sublime that give us the sense that we're transcending, but it's not at all, because sublime has to come from within. It's an experience that you have, that you're generating in your own mind, in your own experience. The false sublime comes from outside. It comes from drugs. It comes from alcohol. It comes from shopping. It comes from online rage. It comes from joining a cause and just getting out all your aggression and violence, right? It comes from causes. It comes from addictions, okay? It gives you a sense, it calms you down and makes you feel like there's something else going on in life besides your job that you're sick of. But it's not real, it's not lasting, it's false, it's an illusion, it's not based on anything real. It's not connecting to that deep part of human nature that's wired for these experiences. So what happens is, you have to have more and more and more and more of it. You have to have, more of this rush. You need more of the drug. You need more of the alcohol. You need more of the sex. You need more of the porn. It's never going to satisfy you. But the real sublime, you don't have that feeling. It's like, it's transformative. Once you feel it, it lasts for you for the rest of your life. It's what Maslow again called the peak experience. So that's the difference between the false and the real sublime. I haven't quite connected it to what you were saying, but if I think about it, I think you're on something very interesting.
I mean, maybe the connection I was trying to draw doesn't hold, but yeah, for me, those early experiences of seeing things that just delighted me in a way that felt like that not only is the thought process a long time ago when something like, oh my goodness, I can't believe this exists. This is so cool. This is the coolest thing. And so clearly created an activation state within me. But then there was also a thought and a feeling of, and a lot of this is sort of pre-verb. It's not truly pre-verbal, I could speak at that age, but it was, that's of me and I'm of it, right? There's a connection there. And then there's something to do about this. The activation state created in the body was, I need to learn more.